So today we're going to try to paint like Salvador Dali, and we're going to look at his techniques, his materials, the way he painted, and we're going to try to discern these things and then create our own composition in a Dali style. We're not copying a Dali painting, but hopefully by looking at these techniques that he used, we can try to identify them and then create our own work in his style. So I start where I've always started now, which is at the library. I think that's a good place to really start getting imagery instead of just relying on the internet. There's so many more images and paintings that you can find in books as compared to what's available on the internet, and the copies are much nicer, and you don't have to print it out when you're painting, because it's nice to have these books open while you're painting too. So when looking at Dali, his early stuff, these are kind of popular early works, we can see he's just really learning how to paint, doing kind of standard academic lessons. These are done in 1920, and this kind of weird long neck comes into play, almost like an El Greco painting, and he called this one Self-Portrait with the Neck of Raphael, which is an indication that he was definitely looking at a lot of different artists as well during this time. But most of this stuff is pretty standard. Here, by this time, we start getting a little bit detached from reality, becoming more of this surreal landscape. But a lot of these early ones are just pretty typical landscape paintings. People usually don't think of this painting, for instance, and this is why you go to the library. This is exactly why you go to the library. You know, Salvador Dali's painting of olive trees. That's never going to come up in a Google search. But look at how he handles the landscape. Very academic, very traditional. You can see he's just really trying to learn how to paint, how to use light. Obviously here we see the influence. This is 1922, so this is, a good 12 years after Cubism takes hold. But a lot of these types of marks would be really similar to the Cubist paintings that we looked at in the Picasso video as well. We can see those coming out here as well. Here I feel like we can start to feel a Dali kind of atmosphere begin to take shape in this painting here. Landscape of Cadec, 1923. We begin to feel a little bit of this surreal quality, that the atmosphere is kind of swirling around with these types of lines. And it, obviously it's supposed to be a real scene. It could be a real scene, but it's highly stylized as well. Here it's just straight up Cubism. I bet a lot of you didn't know that Salvador Dali did Cubist works. If you want to see a better shot of that, should be able to find these somewhere if I'm looking for them, but just a straight up Cubist work there. So he's playing with a lot of different styles. He's trying to find himself during these early years. Portrait, again, pretty standard looking portrait. Here we have the original image for it too. Andre Mantegna. But look at these landscapes in the background. Forget about the portrait for a second. Look at those desolate, weird landscapes. They're already popping up. Even these images, these objects in a landscape, this is Morandi here, Giorgio Morandi. This is 1919. But the way these objects are kind of located in the composition, they're very isolated from each other. They're all sitting by themselves. Here we get a nice look at a drawing and how we interpret it as a painting. So Dali was definitely, I think, in my mind, an expert draftsman. I love his approach to line, the simplification of these types of forms, the hand or the arm, and then a real concentration and focus on detail in the face, really drawing you into this area. It's just a really nice drawing. And then his portrait of it here. Black background, academic, straightforward. Now here we start seeing, I think we're getting into, this is 1926, we start really getting into what I think is really emblematic of Dali's work. And here we see this big landscape. He's playing a little bit with composition by making this a rectangle that aligns with the edges of the canvas. So it almost looks like an abstract painting if it was just this. Perhaps it could be seen almost as an abstract painting. He puts this one figure in it, which gives it this very isolated and dreamlike atmosphere to it. And this is painted in a style that it's not meant to completely mimic the texture, but indicate it. So he's really using paint to indicate form just with these simple value changes in those rocks. So big landscape, very simple value changes. We've got a gradient, a little bit of a gradient here coming down. This cloud is very strange with this blue. Looks like he was painting that cloud all the way up to the end, and then he was like, if that white is the same as this, it probably wouldn't work in space. So he puts a little bit of blue there to push it back in space. I also like this big shadow that's coming down across it. These obviously look just like those Picassos from the 1920s that Picasso was doing, and this is 1926, so it's exact same time. And Dali is painting these Picasso women, almost identical. And then there's this basket of bread, which to me almost feels like a painting where Dali wants to show just how good he is at painting. It doesn't feel like an amazing work, but in terms of painting, it's painted beautifully. And the bread, the way that, there's these holes inside of it, this crustiness over here, you can really feel the crustiness of this bread and the softness of the inside. Obviously, this would be a pain to do all this work here and get it to actually fit the form of that basket. Same with this. So this is kind of a show-off painting, to me at least. It looks like, look at how good I can paint, and you should think of me as a great artist because I can paint ridiculously well. Now we're gonna hop into 1 year later, 1927, and there's a real monumental shift that occurs here. So again, we see that same landscape that we saw in the back of that portrait. That same desolate landscape with these little objects. And that landscape behind the portrait has become the subject of the entire painting itself. All these objects are disparate. A lot of them aren't really connecting in any way. And I think in a lot of ways, when we think of dreams and the dream state, which was obviously very important for Dali and the other surrealists, we can think of dreams as also being disconnected. A lot of times it's imagery that's juxtaposed against other imagery that doesn't make a lot of sense. So when we're looking at a painting, we can see all these little objects juxtaposed into an atmosphere, that kind of makes sense, but we want to read meaning into it, but it's hard to get to that meaning because there is this shield of a dream state. Here's some automatic drawings, and this is when these types of drawings would be done when somebody would want to disconnect themselves from the drawing process. So they would be making marks without even looking at the page and just trying to let their hand scribble, but without thinking about what they're doing. And oftentimes you could find some sort of imagery within that automatic drawing later. Here we see more of these disconnected, disparate imagery, simple landscape. Gradient here, animal parts, blobs, women's bodies parts, got some boobs over here, a butt over here. And when thinking about these, and here we can see very, very isolated, even some more narrative happening here. The old man and the girl is like giving him looks like a basket or something. Images that are becoming part of other images is obviously a big part of Dali's style as well, where one image becomes another image. Here's a little childhood photo he does of himself. It's like a railway track of some sort. And even inside of it, we have a little homage to painting here too. So inside of this painting, he puts this little abstract painting. Now, one artist who is really similar in this type of style of big landscape with lots of stuff in it would be Hieronymus Bosch. And this painting, Garden of Earthly Delight, is quite famous and quite important to surrealists because if you can see, there's little birds down here. Let's try to get this closer. Well, there's little birds down here, there's all these different animals, all these bodies everywhere, and a very simple landscape, a beautifully painted, simple landscape. These types of explosive giant flowers sticking out of the earth with complex machines coming out of them, birds in the sky. So the whole thing is jam-packed, full of symbolism and imagery, but it's still intact within that simple landscape. And this is a theme that's going to come up again and again and again. So here we have a more simplified version. We're skipped. This is 1932 now, and just this simple spoon getting stretched through space. And of course, stretching objects is something really common for Dali. Some absurd sculpture. Here we get to see drawing and finished project as well. Really similar in both ways, but you can really see how he approaches this painting in these marks, almost like ink. These big black areas. Not everything is blended out. And these paintings are going to take more than a day. Man with a big head, and it's propped up by this crutch of some sort. Really starting to feel dreamlike with these amorphous forms in the background, contrasted against simple homes. This man carrying a water jug with no bottom, and a woman smoking a cigarette. And then the people start vanishing almost completely. And we go just to these giant forms in these landscapes. Big, beautiful landscape. Simple, desolate, large. Makes us think of the desert or the ocean, places we look to the horizon and kind of ponder sort of things. But I also think you get a real feeling that you're looking through your eyes at this scene. And it really places you, the viewer, into the environment itself. A lot of drawings. These later ones now were in 1934. You can start to see how these images, again, they're hard-edged. They're very hard-edged shadows. These aren't just nicely blended shadows that go off into simple gradients. A lot of this stuff is very hard-edged. Here, look at this cliff face. All hard edges. Here we get a little bit of shading. Here there's a little bit of shading. But all this is hard. A lot of hard edges here. All this, white on gray. Here we get a little bit of blending in the forms of the body. But again, these dark areas, very dark and very hard-edged. So we go on later on. This, we're going to skip to 1940 now. And here we can see kind of a classic Dali trick where these two women also make this face as well. This is a bust of Voltaire. And again, big desolate. We're almost definitely in the desert now. Simple hills in the background that just allude to the idea of a hill. One little cloud, big gradient on the sky against a hard edge again. Hard edges here, hard edges here. Nice gradient, hard edges. So a lot of this is going to be about playing with gradients, playing with painting, people, and also trying to implement these type of hallucinatory elements into the work itself. Let's look at one of the later pieces. So Dali kept painting until the end of his life. Here we go to 1975. And these become, to me, they become a lot more illustrative. And I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's where they headed. But here we see almost the disintegration of the landscape. However, here at the bottom, we still have that ocean and a little boat here. And so the landscape is still hanging on in these paintings. This one as well. Almost screen print looking image here. Simple landscape again. This is just pure graphic. It's complete graphic design elements in these. Almost getting rid of the landscape completely, but yeah, it still pops up right there, the horizon line. So I think for this one, I'm gonna try to do, I like these later ones as well. I think they're awesome and they're really cool. But for the purpose of this demonstration, this of course is a classic too, but simple landscape form. Look at how beautifully everything's painted. Ooh, I never saw that before. The actual photo that it was taken from. That's interesting. So we know that he worked from photos. I guess that's proof right there. So in creating this, let's print out some different photos for different elements as well to put into that space. But I think we're gonna stick more towards the classic Dali, which would be these here for the purposes of this demonstration, because it's what we really know him for, and I think it's most indicative of his work. This is, Dali in the 1930s, and this can be a good starting image to go from. So let's jump into it. I started by covering my masonite with some gesso, and then I just put a light coat of burnt sienna with some paint thinner, mineral spirits, whatever you want to call it. So this prepares the surface, and it does two things. The gesso protects the wood from oil, and the oils can actually destroy the wood over time. So gesso is a bit of a preparation for archival purposes, but also gesso creates a smooth surface which can be painted on. So you just lop on the gesso. I made a video how to gesso masonite, and you can look at that video to see my technique. But I use a little bit more watery gesso is what I do, and you put down a layer of kind of watery gesso. You have to put down about 5 layers. Takes time if you want to do it right. Then you sand it, and then for the final layer you can get a good gesso like golden or something like that, and just give it 1 layer of the golden gesso on top. And then after I have that, I use burnt sienna and just a bunch of paint thinner, mineral spirits, and just make a tone. And this actually gives it a little bit of a grip, having this one thin layer of oil paint on here. It makes it a little bit more conducive to being painted on. So for our Dali painting, we were thinking about the mid-30s Salvador Dali, when he painted, many of his most famous works, including The Persistence of Memory. That'd be 1931 that he painted that. I've seen that in real life. Another funny thing about The Persistence of Memory, this painting here, if you don't know, is that it's actually quite small. And most people don't know that it's about the size of a piece of paper. It's 9.5 by 13 inches. So it's literally about the size of that I got here. This is 12 by 16. So it's about, like this, a little bit smaller than this. So a lot of these Dalis in the 30s are actually quite small, and people don't realize that they're so little. Of course, later on, he does these big monumental works, and doing big monumental works also helps with realism, of course. That's one reason why the large works scale so nicely. When they're scaled down, they look a lot more detailed and proficient in a lot of ways. So looking at this one as our guide, we're going to start out with just a really standard landscape, and have the 3 elements that are very Dali-esque. Would be a desert-like atmosphere, ocean, some mountains, and a sky. Okay, so these are the first elements. This is going to be a painting that takes multiple days. So let's just jump into it. Did I not clean my brush? Okay, let's put that back in there. Always clean your brushes, kids. Always clean your brushes. Such a waste of money. So, I got this old trusty brush. I did the Picasso painting with it. I'm gonna keep rolling with it. I bought like 10 of these for $12. As you can see, this one's duct taped together. But for some reason, it's holding up pretty good. I've given it a good beating. So, no use in jumping into one of my new brushes when I can still abuse this one a little bit more. So, typically landscapes are gonna start things are generally going to happen on thirds a lot of times in landscapes. So I'm going to go about a third down. And when we think about sky, a lot of times in your heads, you're going to always get these things mixed up. And sky starts lighter and gets darker. It's a pretty simple concept, I know, but always start the sky a little bit lighter here and have it darker as it gets there. So I'm going to be using just titanium white and some little bit of paint thinner, mineral spirits to loosen it up a little bit. If you want to learn more about making these consistencies, I often get comments that are like, why my paint doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Watch my Making Perfect Oil Paint Consistencies video. where I get some close-ups just of oil painting consistencies. So all I've got here is just phthalo blue and some white that I'm mixing up. And we're gonna start with that lightest color first. We're gonna have some, since we're doing a variation, I'm gonna put the cliff type things over here, and my left brain turning off language. It's like, cannot work. And we're just gonna start by laying down simple light blue here. You can actually see a little bit of that orange popping through this blue, which is one reason why this brown is a common color for underpainting, is because it looks nice with a lot of different colors on top of it. If you can see those kind of subtle overlaps there. And now all I'm gonna do is add barely any blue. Be really careful with phthalo blue. It's very powerful stuff. It is though, it's very powerful. Tester, then plop it down. Little subtle variation there. This is getting quite dark, so I'm going to be careful not to go too dark on the top. Am I going to sneeze? Sneezels? Good sneeze. Alright. Good sneeze, Jer. Thanks. Thanks for that. Alright, so it's going slightly darker up here. Another good thing to remember with oil painting is it's a good way to learn patience. I know everybody wants to do everything all at once, but don't worry. There's another week, there's another weekend, there's another Sunday. I notice all my statistics jump considerably for views on both paintingcourse.com and on my videos on Saturday and Sunday, so I can see a lot of people are painting those days. Everybody's working for the weekend. Alright. I am a karaoke master, in case you were wondering. My favorite songs are Natalie Imbruglia, Torn, and Jewel, Foolish Games. Always a hit with the crowd. Okay, so we got a basic banding, I guess we can call it. It's like different bands of blue. Band of blues. Now, what I'm gonna use is, this is just a cheap synthetic brush. Make sure they're clean and dry. And I'm just gonna, using this crisscross motion, I'm gonna knock down these brush strokes, because as you can see, I'm starting to get a little bit of overlap in these areas, and I want to blend these out. Now, when we blend, we generally want to go from the lighter into the darker. That's how I do it. And don't worry about going outside of these lines because we're going to cover that up. So just going slowly here. No need to rush. Just chug along. Keep on chugging. Instead of keep on trucking, keep on chugging. Now here we have a more substantial change from dark to light. So I'm going to take a lot of this light up into that dark. Sometimes it's going to definitely take more than one pass. You can see in my hand, I'm holding this in my hand and I'm just cleaning it after every time because we don't want that last color to get into our new blending band. It's important that at this point, don't look at just little areas. Try to look at your painting as a whole when you're making a gradient. Look at the whole gradient as it develops. It's a little bit lighter here, but I kind of like that. So I'm going to leave it. These corners done a little bit better. Still a few areas that are a little bit harsh. Knock those out. I'm going diagonal here. The first round. Smooth it out. And again, this only works if you got that right paint, so if it's not working, make sure your paint is kind of sticky, not too oily. The two biggest noob problems are too much paint thinner in your paint, too much oil in your paint. That's kind of it. Well, using too many colors is also a common mistake, but if you watch my other videos, you just got the working man's palette, right? You just got cad red, cad yellow, phthalo blue, titanium white, and black. Other colors are nice. I'm glad other colors exist, but less colors, less problems. More money, more problems, right? And we are not trying to get into some color drama here. Trying to make a nice, peaceful gradient background. Nice. I think that's starting to work. So I'm looking at these cliffs and also kind of an area that's gonna indicate some sort of a sea, I think, is gonna be coming down into here a little bit. And that's gonna mirror the sky quite a bit. Just kind of placing that in where it's gonna be. We want these to be really desolate and really simple if we want to do this Dali style. Something to kind of indicate that cliff is coming through there. And you know what I'm gonna do? I'm gonna get a little wacky, and I might regret it, but I think it's important. I'm gonna go for a little bit of a sunset here, and I'm gonna do that by mixing up a pink, and you can use this, just use a little bit of alizarin crimson. The color I have is called Pyrrole Red. And I'm just gonna take a little bit of that and mix up a pink. And I want this pink to be that value. I need the pink to be the same value as that blue. So I have it here, but it's too dark. So I've got to lighten it up. This will only work if you want to do this little sunset move. It will only work if you have the same value as that blue. That seems pretty close. Again, I'm barely using any linseed oil. Just a hint of linseed oil in here. Alright, here we go. I want to have a bit of a sunset just to make it a little bit more beautiful, but also to differentiate the sea kind of area from the sky. You can see how nicely that blue goes with that pink. Don't freak out and don't be like, I need pyro red. You can do this with a lot of different colors. Here I was just talking about the working man's palette. You could do this with cadmium red, but I think it's better to use like an alizarin crimson, which is a very common color, because of the tinting strength of that. And by tinting strength, basically I mean you can use a little bit of paint and it significantly alters your color. It's a very strong color, alizarin. That's why you have to be careful using it. So just knocking down that edge a little bit. If we're gonna do a gradient, we might as well make it nice. Just an indication, just a little hint that this is out there. Pulling that up, pulling it up a little bit. I'm not going like this because that's going to bring the blue back down. I just want to bring that pink up. So I'm just pulling it up. You don't need a pull-up bar. So there we go. We got just a subtle, it's dusk. I like dusk. It's a nice time of the day. Contemplative, is that how you say that? So now I can contrast this sea area, I think, a lot better than I would have been able to with the sky. And I'm just gonna go straight white. Just a hint of that blue in there. I think that might even be too dark still. So a little bit more white. I know we think of the ocean as being darker, but this is a painting. Forgot. Remember when you guys used to paint with sticks with animal hair on it? See, this is what I was worried about. It's really getting tough to make that differentiation. So I'm gonna go with just a hint. I'm gonna paint all this in first. And then I'm going to make sure to make a line just to differentiate a little bit more. Alright. Nice without that. I have this huge ventilation in my studio, talking about first world problems, but you can probably hear those fans going in the background. And they keep it's nice because it's really good ventilation. So I'm not afraid to really use varnishes and these sort of things if I need to, but a lot of times I'm just using straight up paint, oil paint, linseed oil, drying linseed oil, or you can get cobalt cicative. I have a video on that too. No, this is actually kind of working better than I thought now. Up against these pinks, we're definitely starting to see a differentiation in space. Might not need that blue line after all. I think as we get to the shore, it's going to get a little bit darker. Same thing again. Of course, this stuff goes back in space. Due to atmospheric perspective, it gets blurrier and lighter. So trees that are green, if they're farther away, they get less green and more. It's kind of like everything has mist on it. Think of it like that. And I just can't resist but to give a little a couple passes, just lightly dragging that brush over. There we go. Easy peasy. Now, we're gonna need some of those classic cliffs. And if you remember when we were looking at the book, he had those big cliffs that were separated by simple values, different ochres. So I'm going to take a little bit of ochre and some black. Brownish gray I want to make here. And I'm going to think of these cliffs being too scared about making these things too fat, because I can always shorten them down again. I can always cut into these shapes. And from here, we're going to go up towards that kind of yellow ochre color that is synonymous with these. Too dark. Well, some areas are going to be darker, so you can look at these things come to life pretty quick. Here I'm not using any oil at all, just paint. So I think these are starting. Continually getting lighter with these as I get towards that. And here I just chose to put these highlights in, and these can be knocked down a little bit later too. Okay, so these are pretty clunky. I'm gonna just get rid of all my brush strokes. Because I can go over these again. And like I said, we know that Dali is using a lot of these hard edges in conjunction with these soft edges. So I'm going to switch to a really little brush. This is a 0 flat from Princeton. I think it's about $3 brush. And he has a lot of these really hard edges. I'm going to take advantage of the fact that I can still lay my hand on this. And I'm going to try to carve out these edges a little bit harder edged. This might be a good time to get a zoom, so I'll switch the camera angle for this. So here we are, just zoomed in on these cliffs, and we're going to try to just make these edges hard.
A lot of this might be good for day 2 as well, just because a lot of the areas that paint is blending so much, it's tough to get a dark black on there. But we can roll with it. Try to imagine some light source coming into this as well. These are definitely going to need a day 2, which is fine. Now I'm just going to go with straight up white, since I'm losing so much to the blending. And I'm going to try to start thinking about areas where light's going to be hitting these. May have to make stuff up a little bit. These have kind of a nice yellow to them, but I
I'm gonna mix up another color to kind of blend these off into as well. Blending these edges out, making a bit of a gradient here. Like I need a bit of an orange, something to give these a little bit more life. So not so gray. There we go. So this is a common thing you're going to see in painting clouds and painting a lot of different things, is the hard edge versus the soft edge. And it's just a good thing to think in your head while you're painting. Which edge is hard, which edge is soft. 2 on these. And up towards the top, we're gonna see a little bit more disintegration. So the top of your rocks, you break these down a little bit. Salvador Dali, of course, arguably one of the most famous artists in the world, even though he's considered to be kind of kitsch by some. He did leave a long-lasting impact on the world. And I think a lot of that could have had to do with the fact that his imagery resonated with a lot of people. And we think about dreaming in our lives, how much of our life is spent dreaming. And most of us don't pay much attention to the subconscious. But during Dali's time, Freud was in full swing. And investigating these sort of things was kind of the rage, I guess you could say. Now this is definitely going to need another day's work. But just getting these forms in first. Getting the basic forms in. Kind of strange painting so small. Remember, this brush is mini, and seeing it blown up on a TV later, full size, you know, these brush strokes are centimeters thick, and on TV they become inches. So seeing all these things, I was like, no, what am I doing? I was watching. Because you just can't see that big, but maybe that's an idea. I suppose some people did paint with magnifying glasses. There's a history of that. Making miniatures with magnifying glasses. I wonder if Dali used one. His paintings were very small. Well, these were. I think that's good for a first round. I can keep going with this, but I'm gonna pull back from the zoom just so I can see a little bit. I'm having to paint around the camera as I'm painting. So down here, we're gonna have the reflections. And I'm gonna imagine that these reflections go a little bit off one way. And we're kind of tracing these things, making them up a little bit. I like these workshop paper towels. I'm not sponsored, but if you wanna sponsor me, paper towel company, any paper towel companies out there looking for someone to review their paper towels. I'm just using up all these colors on the other direction now. indicate that it is a bit different form. And now, I think we're gonna need a big expanse. Some big, simple gradient going dark brown to light. And just a big brown area up in here is what I'm gonna try to make. Perhaps some simple platform could be good within it, like a table or maybe a square or a cube. Should probably think about that beforehand, as the perspective in these drawings could be kind of strange. So I'm going to jump into that next. So let's jump into getting that big gradient on the bottom half here. Gotta get my gloves on. If you're wondering why I wear gloves, because I don't like washing my hands all the time. But it's also probably a good idea if you're eating in your studio and around cadmium, not to get it too much of it into your body. I'm not a toxicologist, however, cadmium is toxic. So for this, I'm gonna try to mix up, we do have the palette cam in there, don't we? Okay, I'm gonna try to mix up a really nice orange to contrast this blue and make those two things talk. So I'm kind of thinking about that, but I'm also thinking about just making a nice orange. So I start with a lot of cad yellow here. Dirty cad yellow. Cad red. And this is a pretty nice bright orange. I kind of like that, to be honest. Too dark. But I'm going to have it get darker as we get closer, because if I look in a couple of these, I notice that seems to be something that is happening quite often in these paintings, is this area, the horizon farther away is lighter and it gets darker as it gets closer. So this could be a good middle color. Linseed oil. This is gonna be sand, so I don't care if I get the color not consistent. I don't mind if it's a little bit darker here, because we're gonna blend all this out in the end. And it can be nice to have a little variance in these colors. When you're dealing with a brown, it's easy to go a little bit bluer, a little bit redder. Since both of those colors are in brown, mixture of all three primaries. So this is kind of a weird way to do this, but I'm not disliking it. I'm just gonna get some black on my brush, clean it off. What are you doing? Alright. So I've blown out the working man palette. I'm just gonna tell you everything I'm using. It's just burnt umber. These are dark. Looking at his paintings, they are dark. There's a lot of dark areas that help give it that ominous feel. But also, of course, darkness representing the void, nothingness. It's hard to think where, when we think about meaning in painting, part of what the surrealists are doing, some might think absurdity means meaning doesn't exist. And I don't think that's necessarily true. I think if we're talking about dream states in particular, they're rather absurdist things that we actually live, first person style. And there's all sorts of meaning embedded in that. So if you wanted an accompanying piece, something to do in addition to this, you could also start just write down your dreams. And try to use some of those dream elements in your painting. See what happens. A lot of times when you think about that, it's going to be essentially a lot of disparate imagery. When you think about dreams, it's like, oh, I was on an airplane, but I had golf shoes on. And I needed to get to the school, but I didn't have any clothes on. But, of course, school can represent other things besides an actual school building. I know a lot of servers, I've heard, for their whole life, they'll often have dreams about forgetting a table in the restaurant. It's a pretty common dream. And of course, a lot of people have similar dreams, like teeth falling out, not being in control. That would be my interpretation of that. We even have dreams in the Bible. It's Joseph. There was dream interpreters who were kings and stuff like that, wasn't there? Isn't that the thing about the jacket? Joseph's. I can't remember. But dream interpreters were important to kings, and it's because it's how a glimpse into our subconscious can reveal things about ourselves. Kind of doing the same thing as I did with the banding, but going up this time. And it's just cad yellow, cad red, and some burnt umber. Using paint from my favorite paint maker in the United States since I moved back here. Teaching at University of Colorado. Great place to live, Colorado. But since I moved back to the US, after living in Prague for the last 15 years, I got in touch with my old paint maker, and he has a website now. His name's Robert Doak. I think there's a minimum order in order to get his paint, but if you want some good paint, look up Robert Doak Paint, D-O-A-K. His stuff is good. And as you know, I'm not repping anybody's stuff here. But if I find something good, I'll let you guys know about it. I use, for my whites, I tend to use pretty cheap white. I haven't really seen that huge of a difference in titanium white, to be honest. So I just get the cheap Winton white, actually. I'm sure people out there are cringing. But it covers well and doesn't seem to be a problem. I also work on a lot of big paintings, so white paint can get quite expensive for a large painting. It can be good to do just as how I use, cheap gesso from Dick Blick on the base coats of these pieces of masonite. Finishing off with that golden gesso is pretty nice change, and gesso does matter. Drying it linseed oil is also nice. I leave it open because it takes forever to dry completely. But if you leave it open, it actually gets a little bit stickier, I've noticed. It helps the paint. If you want to do some subtle blending, make it a little bit more tacky, conducive to making gradients. And as far as I'm aware, linseed oil is not toxic to have open. Admittedly, when I was looking at these source photos, I was thinking it's kind of weird having the beach farther away be lighter. But it kind of works when you see it all together. It's kind of a weird indication of space. I think now that I'm looking at these and painting and thinking about Dali, there's also these big shadows and things. Like a big, huge cloud is overhead or something. So I'm going to knock this bottom edge off, dry brush. Crisscross. Crisscross is gonna make you blend. Alright. Just keep an eye on everything. Don't look at where you're going. Look at the whole line when you're making these type of gradients. Look at the long line. At how it looks across the entire painting. Just going for a slight 45-degree pop. Pull it back. whatever reason, burnt umber, anything you put burnt umber in, tends to dry really quick. So this will be dry tomorrow. We can get into part 2. Part 2 of painting like Salvador Dali. Pull him down, pull him down, pull him down, pull him down, pull him down. There we go. I'm gonna go big. Go big or go home. Thought I was gonna go big. I had that giant brush. Where did it go? So this is an even bigger brush. I'm looking for a really big gradient, so I'm not afraid to use a bigger brush to get it. So I think that is going to do it. I'm going to spray it with this Krylon Quick Dry. I'm going to use less spray than I did last time. That should be enough. And I'll see you tomorrow. Surrealists used a lot of different techniques and games in order to get inspiration. Many of these were said to free imagination by producing a creative process free of conscious control. The importance of the unconscious as a source of inspiration is central to the nature of surrealism. So there was a lot of different techniques that surrealists used in order to basically free their imagination and basically try to remove their conscious mind from the work, since the unconscious is so important in a lot of surrealist techniques. So I was thinking, as we continue on and begin to put things into the landscape, Often Salvador Dali and many other surrealists would use a variety of techniques to tap into the subconscious. This video is gonna get into those different techniques, and I'm gonna blaze through them quite quickly to give you a good understanding of how these things work, and hopefully that'll give you a better understanding of what surrealism is. So let's start off. There's a whole list of these. Let's go through all of them. Aerography. Aerography is a technique in which a three-dimensional object is used as a stencil, generally for spray painting. So basically, you can take something, crunch it up, and more or less it talks about you make this thing, and then suddenly this becomes a sculpture. And you can draw on it. They talk about spray painting because they were doing large objects. Often this is just simply making cars and stuff like that. So there we have an example of aerography. So the 3D object itself has become the material for a drawing that's going to be on top of it. All right, let's get into the next one. Automatic drawing. So automatic drawing is a process in which the person is supposed to stop thinking about their conscious mind being in control of the brush. So you just start making unconscious swirls. And then from here, often you look at this and you can see that something has formed within it. So this method is said to bring out the unconscious somehow, and you see them in these automatic drawings. There's also a type of automatic writing, and that was a process by which people would just write and write and write and write and write and write and not even think about what they were writing. And thereby they'd create the story using their unconscious mind. All right, bulletism. This one's kind of fun. So bulletism is just throwing some ink at a page of paper and then looking at it and trying to see something. Let's see. Okay. There. Now we have a little airplane. So that's bulletism, and that's one way to make images as well. Really fast, really fun. A cologram. A lot of these have French names. Cologram is just making words into a shape. So the words would be made into a shape, and that's kind of like a sculpture itself. Collage, of course everybody knows collage, where you take two different images and put them together by using scissors to cut out different photographs and place them into new elements. Cubomania. Cubomania is when you take a photo, you cut it into equal-sized squares, and then you throw the squares onto the ground and you rearrange them into a grid, thereby making a new image. Cut-up technique, that's a method that was a literary method. And let's use a real page for this. And here you just take words and you cut them into individual pieces. And then you take these pieces, throw them on the ground, and you get a new. I'm just gonna pull it up randomly. And here we have brand new poem. Important I have my gloves on, isn't it? Okay, screw it. So, in key, hundreds of Russia when operated many. That's what it says. So, that's the cut-up technique. You could also make a dream resume, and that was kind of a funny thing that you could do. And in a dream resume, you would write down all the jobs that you have in a dream. So, éclaboussure. So this is a method that Max Ernst used, among others. And basically, all you do is put some paint down, then you pour some mineral spirits onto it, then you cover it with a piece of paper, and then you take off the paper and you have an image from which you can work with or maybe use as a background or something like that in a painting. It's a fun one. Exquisite Corpse. I think a lot of people have played this probably. This is simply when you have a drawing. Where's my damn... So this is just when you take a piece of paper, make it into 3 different pieces, and then somebody draws the beginning, and then you fold it over, and then you give it to your friend, and then they have to draw the second part. Somebody does the third part. And then you reveal it to be a drawing created. In paranoid critical method, that's one developed by Salvador Dali. And Dali basically, he tried to convince himself and create a paranoid state in himself, and that basically meant that somebody else was controlling his hand. He tried to convince himself that somebody else was in control of his hand and his movements, so he himself was not in control of his movements. Liquid paint is blown. This is called soufflage. You're like, no, don't destroy your nice airplane. Soufflage, so that is paint which is blown. And there was some other ones in photography where they would expose the same roll of film like 3 times. Triptography, they called it, meaning triple photography, doing 3 images on each frame, which would basically make it impossible to have any discernible subject. So you just blindly take a roll of film 3 times on top of it. So we're going to use one of these methods, I think, in order to create some imagery to put into our painting that we're working on right now. And so I'm going to look over this, look at all my different techniques that I've done, and I'm going to use one to implement into the painting itself. I've created my own technique for creating this surrealist technique. I took 2 cups and filled this with gesso with a little bit of water, but still pretty thick, and this one with black paint. And so I'm going to throw it at this, and then I'm going to use this, and I'm going to transfer that onto the painting. So they always say you've got to be prepared to commit suicide in a painting. So here we go. Okay, I'm going to let that dry. And that will be the new element to be incorporated, and I'll use that somehow in the work. Now we've got this big blob across the canvas here, and there's some really nice areas of this, and some that I don't like quite as much. Also, some stuff seems to be alluding to some other images, so I'm going to look at that, and I'm going to try to pull out other images from that, go in with the shadow here, get some crutches to hold things up to make it more Dali-esque. But as you can see up close here, it did get some nice swirlies going on in there, and this is a nice little gradation. I think that can be worked with to kind of carve that area out. So it's really looking at what was created during this, what's called aleatoric. Aleatoric means basically by chance, but as part of some sort of recipe or game. The result of that is an aleatoric painting, which is kind of what we're seeing now. So you can see some areas are nicer than others. Some areas got kind of spotty too, which is kind of cool. Like down here, you can see these little areas where the oil painting underneath didn't like that water, so it reacted in this kind of spotty way. That's kind of interesting too, these types of happy little accidents, as we like to call them, that start occurring in these pieces. And some of you may be thinking, you painted acrylic on top of oil? And yeah, okay, I did. And a lot of times, many painters, from surrealists all the way through abstract expressionists, would often even mix oil paint with water to get effects that would be clashing and create new types of imagery from that. So I'm going to jump into this next part and just start painting and working with this splashy blob that I've created in this landscape. Still a little bit wet. So I hope you enjoyed watching the painting like Dali. As always, I could keep going on these paintings forever, but I'm happy where this one ended up so far, and I think it gives you a good glimpse into the techniques and methods that Salvador Dali and other surrealists would have used to make these paintings. Please go over to paintingcourse.com. New painting course coming up, beginning painting. Redoing the whole site. So go check that out. Please like and subscribe if you like these types of videos. And write a comment down below on what other artists you think I should do painting like videos of. So, thanks for watching. This is an epic video, and we made it through. Have a good one. Bye.